Koshin Paley Ellison, ladies and gentlemen. How do I refer to you?
Is just
Okay.
fine.
Could you explain the Eightfold Path, which is in your book, or your book is focused around, and could you explain that very slowly in a super interesting way for us lay people who are like in everyday life and don't want to like try to memorize something? But why does it matter to all of us in 2023?
Yeah, it's to me a very juicy question, and to me is one of the reasons I wrote the book the way I wrote it was to make it very accessible and contemporary, which it is actually. It was written, 2600 taught 2600 years ago, and yet today still just as relevant. So it begins with this guy, named Shakyamuni Buddha, who was like all of us, was kind of caught in his life and really feeling, I always think of him in this kind of contemporary age where, distracted, on his phone too much, working too much, kind of basically in his life with blinders on.
He was like
and
Netflix,
then at some point
he was watching
he realized,
Netflix,
like, wait a second.
Yes.
He was binge watching Game of
and he's
Thrones again,
like
or
doing
something
Uber
like
Eats. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And just like shoving it in, right? Just shoving it in. And it's like, it almost is, it seems like pleasure, but it's what I always think of as kind of junk pleasure, because it's, on some level it might be okay, but
doesn't
it's
make
too
us
much.
happy, right? It's like a weird, it's like a cheap pleasure that makes us happy in our minds, but when we do the thing, eating the cheap fast food burger, we don't feel good. We don't like it.
No. Ugh. Yeah. Totally. It's also like why, so the next thing was like he realized like, oh, I have to let me try something different. And so like maybe he was reading Elephant Journal, or maybe he was, using some meditation apps or trying different things, because what he realized was that he was subject to the things that are reliable, which is aging, illness, and death. And he realized like, oh, I'm going to have a problem here, that I'm subject to this. And so do I do. And so he saw that he needed to set out and do something different. So I think like many of us are setting out and doing different things. So like you were trying amazing meditation apps, or going to a yoga studio, trying a paleo diet. We're like doing all kinds of things, Zumba maybe.
I love how you're saying this. It's like all of us in this sort of spiritual light world, we're trying all these things, just, juicing, whatever it is. And that's what the Buddha did.
A lot
when
of
he went out, he tried all these different yogas and practices. And I love how you're saying that.
Totally. And I think so then he did that for a while, which I think, there was also my experience as a young person. And eventually he realized like, I need to stop like trying all these different things and doing a million different things, and it's like enough already. Like I think of my grandmother, where she's like, enough.
Yeah, our Buddhist teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, called it spiritual materialism. It's not that it's like bad, because you're trying, you're searching, but it's not, again, it's like a new form of entertainment.
Exactly. And it's so poignant. And I think that we have to, in many ways, that people, like, how do we listen to that voice when it's like enough already? Like the things that we're trying to do just don't work. We have a training here at the Zen Center called Foundations and Contemplative Care, where it's really for anyone who's interested in bringing what they value and what they're actually doing with their life together. And so we do that through learning how to be caring with people in hospice and hospitals and different places. But it's really, many people come to that training because they feel like things are like a little out of whack, and I feel quite lonely, trying so many different different things, and how do I do something new? How do I
Mm,
serve? How do I be
love
in the
that.
world? And so I think that the Buddha, yeah, it's so great, and so inspiring to like. So the Buddha did what his version of that was. He sat under a tree, and which we now call the Bodhi tree, but it's just, how do you stop? So like all of us can reflect on like, how do you stop? What's your deal? And but what he stopped and what he was able to do was actually face what he was afraid of. He was able to face that he was afraid of death. He was afraid of getting sick. He was afraid of being ill. He was afraid of losing all the people that in his life. And those are the things that we have to, in some ways, deal with. I have the total pleasure of spending some of the time with people who know that they're dying. And the message is so consistent. They're usually saying, well, no, I can't believe I was so afraid my whole life. What was I hesitating my whole life for? What was that all about? And so really learning how to, really meet our life a little bit more directly and more intimately. Because I know most people that I have the chance to speak to, like, feel a bit lonely, feel a little disconnected, and yet we know how to do this. And so the Buddha really put together this teaching that this is workable. You can have that feeling like
Yeah.
this kind of sucks and do something fresh and new about it. And so it's quite exciting to me to be able to work with this map that he laid out, because the third truth that he laid out was that, you can change. Look, we are not stuck forever. We are not fated to live this life, that we can actually do something
So
new.
that's like, you're referring to the Four Noble Truths, like his first teaching, I think, which it was like, life sucks. Yeah, it's hard. And we have this illusion that it's kind of okay, but it sucks sometimes, but it's great sometimes. But really, fundamentally, there's a lot of suffering going on, but there's a path out of that, and you can live life genuinely. And that's sort of the Buddhist path that he laid out. And part of that is the Eightfold Path.
And it can be, we can.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, it is the Eightfold Path itself, and I think that what's so beautiful is that inside of the Eightfold Path is, it's not linear. Many people say, and I think that some of us want to jump to that, but we have to also still honor where we get caught and struggle. So our caught and struggles don't ever really end, but our relationship to them ends because of and changes because of how we focus on them through aspects of the Eightfold Path. Like the first one is actually, often thought of as perspective. And traditionally, the Eightfold Path is thought to be a way of talking about, like, right this, right view, right, everything is right, this and that. And I feel that I wanted to look at each of them as a practice itself. So the first one being perspective as a practice. So like, how can I change my perspective about my situation? For many years, I was pretty miserable and feeling very lonely. And, I tell this story about, when I was 18 and going out to Naropa Institute, and had my beads on, and I was on a Greyhound bus and feeling pretty cool. And this woman turns to me and she's like, "Oh, so what's your deal?" And she said, "Are you a Buddhist?" And I was like, yeah, I am a Buddhist. And I felt so good about that. And she said, "Oh, who are your teachers?" And at that time I was like the Buddha, shopping around. I was like, "Oh, this person, Sharon, Jack, Gaelic Rinpoche, going around." And she said, "Oh, so you're like a lone wolf." And I remember thinking, yes,
even cooler.
yes, that's me. That's me.
Yeah.
yeah. And it was amazing because she said, you know, the interesting thing about lone wolves is that they are so sick. We're pack animals. And I remember thinking,
she said that to you.
Oh shit.
Wow. This
Yeah.
like it feels like you're Naropa and you're like, you know, the old lady who confronted Naropa. She kind of tricked him. She was very nice and happy, and then she kind of condemned him. You ran into like a wise woman.
She was incredible.
Yeah, on the Greyhound bus.
Yeah, she was amazing. And to be open to that, you know. And so to me, it was like this moment of perspective. Like I had this story about myself and feeling like so good about it. Like I was like John Wayne on the prairie, feeling really good about that and really realizing like, wow. And also what was so generous about what she did was actually change my perspective and realize like, oh my goodness, that's exactly what medicine I need, was actually to be with others, to belong. So I think very often the perspective is often what keeps us from belonging to friends, to you know, people that we care about, what keeps us from belonging, feeling like we belong in the world. And for me at that time, all of those things were up for grabs. And I did not have a sense of belonging at all. And so I think it's super important to look at our perspective. And I had such a story about my own sense of myself as a victim, which, you know, I did experience terrible things. You know, I experienced, you know, very gross forms of anti-Semitism, to bullying, and to sexual and physical violence in my family home. And so like so I understood, and I had in some ways good reasons to feel that I am, you know, I was a victim of those things, but I realized I added a whole layer to it, that I used it as a wall, as a barrier to actually, so the armor that I needed as a child, which I'm so grateful I had, became like
I feel like that defines, like,
and
you know, as editor at Elephant Journal, that defines like half of the articles on Elephant Journal. They're incredibly powerful, vulnerable, genuine stories of often of hard things, of trauma. Not always trauma, but often hard things. But sometimes things similar in depth and hurt as what you're describing. But then people often, and this is again spiritual materialism, and it's also natural, it's not something to condemn, but it doesn't help us. Like you said, as we grow up, we make that our identity and it becomes solid. So are you saying like these very real things that happen don't define us, and in fact limit our ability to heal sometimes if we make our identity too solid?
For me, you know, it was helpful for a period of time to kind of keep myself okay. And then at a certain point, it changed from armor to a cage, you know, and it really felt no longer like I could, and the cage kept other people out and it kept me in, and it was sort of the size of my body, you know, and so, and also the front of the cage was the things I knew about, and then the back of the cage was things I was not aware of because I wasn't able to get out and take a look.
Well expressed.
And
that's powerful. Yeah. And also the front of the cage, the stuff we know is often not totally correct. We make this idea, right?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I had such an idea of my own sense of agency and my own sense of responsibility, and also how, you know, that sealing myself off was actually perpetuating the problem.
Yeah.
And
I should mention I'm
increasing my
named
suffering.
after Philip Waylon. Are you aware of Philip Waylon? Yeah.
Oh, Philip.
Yeah.
Oh my
I figured you might
goodness.
adore him. I adore him. Yeah, my mom adored him. She's sitting by me right now. Do you want to
What
see
a,
Mama?
Hi. Hello.
yeah. Hey, Mom.
We have an audience of one in person.
Nice to see you.
So yeah, my mom's the one who like half named me after Philip Waylon. So, and she taught at Naropa. Small world.
Yeah.
So
No way.
maybe back to the
Amazing.
Eightfold Path a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
perspective is the most important to me. It's like it begins there. And I think in some ways that it's just critical that we take a look at what the perspective is. And then, the next few are super important, which, speech as a place of practice and action as a place of practice. So I'd like to, just pause there for a moment when thinking about action, because it's what I was so excited about was some of the Buddha's original teachings on action was to actually be aware of, it's not so much about what you do and what you think about what you do, but it's actually about what your action does to the community, which I feel like is incredible medicine for our time. Like we live in this kind of these little pods, becoming like pod people, where we just think like what we want, what we think, what we want, which is just nothing new either. But the danger of that is we stop thinking about, wow, how I'm talking and what I'm doing is affecting you, Waylon, and how we're connecting and actually making the effort to connect affects everything. And so what I eat and how I walk down the street, actually I love this amazing story that I learned. Our center's on 23rd Street in Manhattan, which is a kind of a busy thoroughfare, and walking down the street, which we do, all the time. And this guy comes out of the building one day, like, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And he said, wow, I just want to introduce myself. My name is such and such. And I just have to say, I really enjoy watching you and that other guy walking down the street.
Oh.
And I said, oh, what's your name? And he works as a door person in this building. Well, I never had seen because he's behind glass. And it was such a wonderful reminder of like, he's just like, I just feel like when you're walking down the street, you're really there.
Yeah. And in doing that,
and it was just such a beautiful.
You gave him a moment of being present and appreciative.
I mean, so much so that he like ran out of the building. I mean, it was just so beautiful. And, and to me, that's not about me, but like, it's just such a great reminder of like, we have no idea how we're impacting people by how we're walking through the grocery store or, sitting next to our mom on the sofa, or whatever that is, and we forget that, it's just so important. And to remember that everything is important. Like we have this opportunity to appreciate and completely enjoy each moment. And what takes us away from that enjoyment is often our distraction.
Yeah, and we're also really uncomfortable. Maybe that's some level of addictive speediness. But we're uncomfortable when we have those opportunities for space.